"No one will ever choose you, Cordelia," her sister said, laughing behind her painted fan, and the little knot of gentlemen around her laughed with her. Because Rosamond Verrell was beautiful, and it cost nothing to agree with a beautiful woman. "You may as well go home to your ledgers and your dull grey gowns. A man wants a wife he can be seen with." Adrian Marsh, 9th Duke of Eastmere, heard those words from across the crowded drawing-room of Lord Hartwell's country house, and he did not know in that first moment which of the two young women had spoken and which had been struck. He knew only that a voice had cut through the pleasant hum of the party like a blade drawn across silk, and that somewhere near the tall windows a woman had gone very still. He set down his glass. It had been a long while since anything at a party had interested him. Adrian had learned, over the 11 years since he had come into the title, that a duke was a kind of prize offered up at every gathering he entered, and that the offering never varied. Mothers arranged their daughters near him as one arranged flowers in a vase. Fathers found excuses to speak of shooting and of horses. The daughters themselves practiced a particular expression, a soft, upward, expectant tilt of the chin, and he had come to know that expression so well that he could no longer see the faces beneath it. They had all begun to look the same to him, lovely, hungry, and entirely without surprise. So he had come to Hartwell Court prepared to be bored, as he was always bored, and to leave early, as he always left early, and to say to his friend Colonel Ferris on the ride home that country society was precisely as tedious as town society, only muddier. But now he found himself looking for the woman who had gone still. He found her at once, and was surprised he had not marked her before. She stood a little apart from the bright centre of the room, near the window, where the last grey light of the November afternoon fell across her shoulder. She was not the beauty who had laughed. That one was all rose silk and glittering earrings and a mouth made for saying cruel things prettily. This one wore grey, exactly as the cruel one had scorned, a plain, well-cut, unfashionable, without a single jewel, her dark hair drawn back simply from a face that was not pretty in the practised way of the room. It was better than pretty. It was a face that thought. And at this moment it was a face fighting, with quiet and terrible dignity, not to show that it had been wounded. She did not weep. She did not flush and stammer and look about for rescue as another woman might. She lifted her chin, not the coy, practised tilt, but a real one. The lift of a person who has decided she will not give her tormentors the satisfaction they have come for, and she said, in a low, even voice that carried further than the sisters' laughter, because it did not try to, "Then I shall be very content with my ledgers, Rosamond. They, at least, add up." A few people tittered uncertainly, not sure whether they were permitted to find the plain sister witty. Rosamond's smile thinned. And the young woman in grey turned toward the window, as though the darkening garden were far more worth her attention than any of them, and by that simple turning she took herself out of the game entirely, and won it. Adrian discovered that he had crossed half the room. He did not remember deciding to. That in itself was remarkable enough to stop him where he stood, one hand still half lifted, a man of 38 who had not done a single spontaneous thing in a decade suddenly finding his feet had opinions of their own. He arrested the motion. He was, after all, the Duke of Eastmere, and dukes did not scuttle across drawing-rooms toward penniless girls in grey. It would be remarked upon. It would be, in its way, a kind of announcement, and he was not a man who made announcements. He turned instead to his host, who was hovering as hosts hover near dukes. "Hartwell," he said, "the two young ladies by the window. The Verrell sisters, are they not?" Lord Hartwell's face brightened at once, for he took the question to be about the beauty, as everyone always took such questions to be. "Miss Rosamond Verrell, yes, your grace, a diamond, is she not? An absolute diamond, and her father's a decent enough fellow, though sadly reduced. There was money once, Marsh money on the mother's side, all gone now, more's the pity. But the girl, one overlooks a great deal for a face like that." He lowered his voice with the air of a man sharing a delicacy. "Half the county's at her feet. I don't doubt she'll marry very well indeed, jewels or no." "And the other," Adrian said. Hartwell blinked. "The other?" "In grey. By the window." Hartwell's enthusiasm cooled several degrees, the way a room cools when a cloud crosses the sun. "That's the elder, Miss Cordelia Verrell. A worthy girl, I'm sure, very steady, very sensible. Keeps her father's books, I understand, since they cannot keep a steward. But she is what? He made a small, apologetic gesture with his glass, the gesture of a man declining to speak ill and speaking it anyway. She is not her sister, your grace. 24 and no one's asked. A pity, but there it is. Some flowers bloom and some do not. Adrian looked again at the elder Miss Verrel, at the straight line of her back and the steadiness of her profile against the grey window. And he thought that Lord Hartwell was a fool, and that most of the men in this room were fools, and that he himself had very nearly been the greatest fool of all, for he had walked into this house half an hour ago and looked directly at that face and not seen it. Because he too had been trained to look only where the jewels were. Some flowers, Adrian said, are simply planted in the shade by careless hands. It does not follow that they cannot bloom. Hartwell laughed, a little uncertainly, taking it for one of the Duke's dry remarks and not understanding it. Adrian did not trouble to explain. He rarely troubled to explain himself. It was one of the privileges of his rank and one of the few he genuinely valued. He did not cross the room to her that evening. He wished later that he had, but he was a careful man made careful by long practice, and he had learned that a duke's attention was a heavy thing, capable of crushing where it meant only to warm. If he went to her now, before this whole watching, whispering room, he would not lift her. He would make her a spectacle, the plain sister the Duke had noticed, a curiosity, a thing to be gossiped over and then dropped. He knew exactly how the county would use it against her. He had seen society do worse to kinder people, so instead he watched and learned, over the course of that long evening, a great many things. He learned that Cordelia Verrel was never idle and never at the center of anything. When the dancing began, she was not asked. And she did not sulk at the edge of it. She made herself quietly useful instead, fetching a shawl for an old lady who felt the draught, turning the pages for the plain pianist, whom no one else would speak to, listening, truly listening, with her whole grave attention, to a deaf old gentleman whom the rest of the room avoided as one avoids a bore. Adrian, who had spent 11 years being flattered, found that he could not look away from a woman being kind to people who could do nothing whatever for her. He learned that her father, Sir Henry Verrel, was a mild, defeated, amiable man who loved his younger daughter helplessly and leaned upon his elder one without appearing to notice he did so, the way a man leans on a wall or a stick or anything that is simply always there. He learned that Rosamond Verrel was cleverer than she was kind, and that her cleverness was all bent toward a single object, to be married, gloriously, before her beauty could fade or her family's poverty become quite impossible to hide. He watched her work the room like a general, and he understood her, and he did not blame her precisely. The world had taught her that her face was her only fortune, and she was spending it as fast and as brightly as she before the market closed. But he saw, too, how she used her sister. How Cordelia's steadiness made Rosamond's sparkle shine the brighter by contrast. How the cruelty by the window had not been a slip of temper, but a performance staged for exactly that little audience of admiring men, the elder sister set up as a foil, a thing to be laughed at so that the younger might be laughed with. And Adrian, watching, felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt anger, a cold, clean, particular anger on behalf of a woman he had not yet spoken a single word to. Colonel Ferris found him near the fireplace at 11 o'clock, still watching, and followed the line of his gaze and raised his eyebrows nearly to his hairline. "Marsh," he murmured, "you've been staring at the Verrel girl for the better part of an hour. The whole room's begun to notice. Half of them think you've lost your senses over the beauty at last, and the other half can't work out which one you're looking at." The elder, Adrian said, Ferris, who had known him for 20 years, went quiet at that. For he heard something in his friend's voice he had not heard for a very long time, not amusement, not the wary courtesy Adrian offered the world, but a low, even seriousness, the tone of a man who has made up his mind about something and has not yet told even himself. The elder, Ferris repeated, the grey one, the one they were laughing at. He studied Adrian's profile. "You know what they say of her? No prospects, no fortune, no beauty to speak of. They say a great many things," Adrian said, "and they are wrong about most of them. I have watched her for an hour, Ferris. She has more sense in her than the whole of this room together and more courage, and she has spent the entire evening being kind to people who will never thank her for it." Tell me, how many women have you known in your life who are kind when there is nothing whatever to be gained by it? Ferris considered. Not many, he admitted. No, Adrian said softly. Not many at all. He set down his glass a second time that night, and this time he did not cross the room, because it was late and the moment was wrong and he was still, always, a careful man. But he made himself a promise, standing there by Lord Hartwell's fire, watching Cordelia Verrell turn the pages for the friendless pianist with her grave and lovely attention. He made himself the first true promise he had made in 11 years. He would find a way to know her. Not the spectacle of a duke's sudden notice, not a thing that would be used against her. He would find a real way, a slow and honest one, and he would learn whether the woman was as fine as the profile, and if she was, then let the county laugh. Let Rosamond Verrell laugh loudest of all. He rather thought he knew, already, how that laughter would end. The next morning he did not ride home to town as he had planned. He sent Colonel Ferris ahead with his apologies and a vague word about business in the neighborhood. And he took a set of rooms at the inn in the nearby village of Netherford, and he set about, with the patience of a man laying siege to something he means to hold forever, the quiet business of arranging to meet Cordelia Verrell as though by the purest accident in all the world. It was not, as it happened, difficult to arrange. Adrian had only to ask a few careful questions in the village to learn the shape of her days, for the poor are always more closely observed than they know, and a young woman who does a household's marketing herself, and visits the sick, and walks 2 miles each way to the lending library because her father cannot spare the carriage, leaves a very legible trail behind her. He learned that she walked out most mornings, in almost any weather, along the river path that ran between the Verrells' modest manor of Thornleigh and the village. He learned that she went alone without a maid, because there was no maid to spare, and that she was not afraid of the solitude but seemed rather to seek it, as a person seeks the 1 hour of a crowded day that belongs to no one but herself. And so, on a bright, cold morning 3 days after the party at Hartwell Court, the Duke of Eastmere put on the plainest coat he owned, a good coat, but a country gentleman's coat, nothing that shouted his rank, and he walked out along the river path from the Netherford end, and he timed it with the care of a general, so that he should meet her at the middle. He was not, he told himself, deceiving her. He would give his name if she asked it. He was merely arranging the ground, choosing the field, giving himself, for once in his managed and observed and flattered life, the chance to be known first as a man, and only afterward as a duke, by the one person in the world he had lately found he most wished to be known by. He saw her before she saw him. She came along the path with a market basket over one arm and her plain grey cloak pulled close against the cold, and she was not thinking of him or of anyone. She had her face turned up to the bare branches where a robin was singing, and there was on that grave face an expression he had not seen on it at Hartwell Court, an unguarded private happiness, small and complete, the happiness of a person entirely alone and glad of it. He almost turned back. It seemed for a moment a kind of theft, to break into that solitude. But then the robin took flight, and she lowered her face and saw him, and the private happiness folded itself away behind the grave composure he already knew, and Adrian, 9th Duke of Eastmere, who had faced down a charging boar and a hostile parliament, and the whole massed disapproval of his aunts, found that his heart was beating like a boy's. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Cordelia Verrell returned, and she said it with the reserved courtesy of a woman who has learned to give strangers exactly as much as manners require and not 1 syllable more. She did not simper. She did not, as 9 women in 10 would have done, brighten and soften at being addressed by a tall, well-made gentleman on a lonely path. She merely inclined her head, adjusted the basket on her arm, and made as though to pass him, polite, complete, closed as a door. "Forgive me," Adrian said, and found to his own surprise that he was almost smiling. "I am a stranger here, and I fear I have walked myself thoroughly lost. Is this the path to Netherford, or have I contrived to go the wrong way entirely?" It was a small lie, and he did not enjoy telling it, but it was the only doorway he could find into a conversation, and he told himself he would balance the account later. She studied him a moment, and he saw, with a private pleasure, that she was not deceived nearly so much as he had hoped. Her grey eyes went quite openly from his face to his boots, which were too fine for a man who could lose himself on a 2-mile path, and back to face again, and one dark eyebrow lifted a fraction. "It is the path to Netherford," she said. "You would have found it in any case, sir, by the simple expedient of following the river, which does not, as a rule, get lost. But you are welcome to the reassurance." Adrian laughed. It came out of him before he could govern it, a real laugh rusty from disuse that startled a Moran up out of the reeds, and he saw her look at him with the first spark of genuine interest, as though a stranger's honest laughter were itself a small surprise worth marking. "I am found out," he admitted. "I confess it. I saw you coming and I wished for an excuse to speak with you, and lost my way was the best my wits could manage on short notice. It was a poor effort. You are quite right to scorn it." "I did not scorn it," she said. "I merely noticed it." There is a difference, though few men trouble to learn it. But something in the set of her mouth had eased, and she did not walk on. "Why should you wish to speak with me? You do not know me, and I promise you I am not worth the losing of a morning. Everyone in this county will tell you so, and they have made quite a study of the matter." "Then everyone in this county," Adrian said, "has been careless, and I mean to correct their arithmetic. You keep books, I'm told." "I have always found that people who keep honest books are the only people whose account of themselves may be trusted, since they are in the habit of making things balance rather than making things flatter." For the first time, something moved behind the grey composure, not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one, the flicker that comes before a smile as grey light comes before a dawn. "You are a strange gentleman," she said. "I am told so, frequently, and always by people who mean it as a complaint. I have decided to take it as a compliment. It saves a great deal of trouble." And so they walked. He'd not offer her his arm, for he sensed she would have refused it, and refused too, whatever it implied. He simply walked beside her along the river, at the pace she set, and he did what he had almost forgotten how to do in 11 years of being flattered. He listened, and he asked, and he did not once speak of himself unless to answer. He gave his name as Adrian Marsh, which was true, and let her take him for a plain Mr. Marsh, which he did not correct, and which pricked at his conscience, like a burr in a boot, the whole of that first walk. But he could not bring himself to say the rest. He had seen too many faces change at the word Duke, go bright and hungry and false in an instant, and he could not bear to watch it happen to this one. Not yet, not until she had shown him who she was without the word between them. She showed him, over that walk and the ones that followed, exactly who she was, and every revelation was better than the last. She told him dryly, without the smallest bid for pity, of Thornley, the little manor mortgage to the roof-tree, and of her father, who was the kindest of men and the worst of managers, and who had run through her mother's fortune and his own, and now ran, gently and hopelessly, through what little remained, so that it had fallen to Cordelia at 19 to take the household books out of his failing hands and hold the whole precarious edifice together by sheer force of arithmetic. "He does not know how near a thing it is," she said, on the second morning, for there was a second morning and a third, the Duke finding excuses to be always at the middle of the path when she reached it. "I do not tell him. It would only grieve him, and grief does not pay the coal merchant. So I make it balance. I make it balance every quarter, and no one knows how, and no one thanks me, because the price of my competence is that no one ever sees the cliff we are not falling off." "Your sister does not help you," Adrian said. It was not quite a question. Cordelia was quiet a moment. She did not, he noticed, take the easy road of complaint, though lay wide open before her. "Rosamond helps in the only way she believes she can," she said at last, carefully. "She is beautiful, and she means to marry someone who can mend us all, and she may well do it, and if she does I shall bless her for it. She is not cruel by nature. She is only frightened, and being frightened has made her hard, and being beautiful has taught her that hardness is permitted her." She looked out at the river. It is easier to be gentle when one has been told one's whole life that one is worth being gentle to. Rosamond has been told she is worth being married. It is not the same thing. I do not think anyone has ever told her she is worth being kind to, so she does not know how to be it. Adrian looked at her, at this plain mortgaged, unmarried woman of 24, standing on a cold riverbank, finding compassion for the very sister who had held her up to a room's laughter, and he understood, wholly and finally, that he had never in his life met anyone like her, and that he was knowing to be able to walk away, and that he did not wish to. "And you," he said. "Who has told you that you are worth being kind to?" She turned and looked at him, and for a moment the composure slipped entirely, and he saw straight down into her, into the loneliness she carried so lightly that no one had ever thought to ask whether it was heavy. "No one," she said simply. "But I find I can manage without it. One does not miss what one has never had, and I have my books, and my river, and my robin, and an hour to myself most mornings, which is more than a great many people can say." She lifted her chin in that way he had first loved across a crowded room. "I am not to be pitied, Mr. Marsh. I hope you have not sought me out 3 mornings running in order to pity me. It would be a great waste of your walking." "No," Adrian said, and his voice was not quite steady. "No, that is the last thing on earth I feel for you. I promise you that." It was after the 4th morning that his conscience finally overcame his caution, or rather, that his caution changed sides, and told him that the longer he let the small deception stand, the crueller its unmasking would be. He was falling in love. He was too honest with himself to name it anything softer, and a man who is falling in love has no business doing it behind a false coat. So on the 5th morning he came to the river path resolved to tell her the truth. That plain Mr. Marsh was the Duke of Eastmere, the most sought-after bachelor in 3 counties, the very man whose supposed interest in her beautiful sister had set half the neighbourhood alight, that he had watched her at Hartwell Court, that he had taken rooms at Netherford for no reason on this earth, but to walk this path beside her. He rehearsed it as he came. He who never rehearsed anything rehearsed it a dozen ways, and none of them sounded anything but what it was. A wealthy man who had toyed, however kindly, with a poor woman's trust. But she was not on the path. He waited. He waited past her usual hour, and then past all reasonable hours, and the cold came up off the river and the light went thin, and still she did not come. And a slow dread gathered in him, the dread of a man who has learned that the thing he has found is precious precisely by fearing to lose it, and at last he did the thing he had sworn he would not do. He went openly, as himself, to Thornley. He was a duke. Doors do not stay shut to dukes. But this door, when he reached it, was an estate that told its own hard story before ever it opened. The paint blistered, one shutter hanging, the knocker tarnished green, the whole small house wearing that particular shabby gentility that shouts louder than rags. Because rags at least have given up pretending. He knocked. A single tired maid-of-all-work admitted him, gaping at the fine carriage he had at last permitted himself, and a moment later Sir Henry Verrall came hurrying into the cold little hall, tugging his coat straight. His amiable face a war of alarm and hope at the sight of an unmistakably important stranger. "Your servant, sir," Sir Henry stammered. "I don't believe I have the honour." "Eastmere," Adrian said. "The Duke of Eastmere. Forgive the intrusion, Sir Henry. I have come to inquire after Miss Cordelia, your elder daughter. She was not, understood she walks each morning, and this morning she did not," and he stopped, aware that he was explaining far too much, aware that he was a duke standing in a threadbare hall confessing to a bewildered baronet that he had noticed his elder daughter's absence from a walk. "Is she well?" Sir Henry's mouth had fallen open at the word Duke and stayed open. "Eastmere," he breathed. "The Duke of Cordelia. You have come about Cordelia." He said the name as a man says a word in a foreign language, sounding it out, unable quite to believe it fits the sentence. "But, your grace, surely you mean Rosamond." "Everyone means Rosamond. My younger daughter, she is. I will fetch her at once. She is upstairs. She will be so." "I mean Cordelia," Adrian said gently, but with the flat finality that 11 years of dukedom put into a man's voice when he chose to use it. "I have not the smallest interest in whom everyone means. Is your elder daughter well, sir?" "She was not on the river this morning, and I find I cannot rest until I know why." And it was into that moment, the Duke standing tall in the shabby hall, the father gaping, the truth of who wanted whom hanging plain and astonishing in the cold air between them, that Rosamond Verrall came down the stairs. She had heard the carriage. She had heard, through the thin old floors, the word Duke. She came down radiant, transformed, dressed in an instant in her best, her whole beautiful face lit like a window at a feast. for this was the thing she had prayed for, worked for, staked her entire future upon. The great match walking in at her own front door, and she was halfway down the stairs, her hand already out, her smile already made, before she heard and understood the name he had spoken. Cordelia. Adrian watched the beautiful face change. He watched the radiance curdle. He watched Rosamund Verrall arrive at the foot of her own staircase and understand, in one appalling instant, that the greatest prize in 3 counties had come to her house and had not come for her, had come of all the impossible things. For the sister she had told a whole ballroom no one would ever choose. "Your Grace," Rosamund said, and her voice was sweet as ever, but there was something new behind it now, something cold and swift and calculating, a thing waking up. "How very good of you to call. But I fear there has been some confusion. My sister is not, that is, Cordelia keeps to herself. She is not at home to callers." The smile flickered. "She is not well, poor thing. Chill. She is confined to her room and can see no one. Perhaps your Grace would take some refreshment, and I—" "Is that true?" Adrian said. He had turned to Sir Henry and his voice was very quiet, and the father, honest to the bone and hopeless in a crisis, could not lie to a duke. She has a cold, your Grace," he faltered. "A slight cold only. She took a chill on the river yesterday, and Rosamund thought it best she keep in. She is not so very ill as all." "Papa," said Rosamund. But it was done, and Adrian Marsh, Duke of Eastmere, looked from the frightened, scheming beauty at the foot of the stairs to the frightened, honest father wringing his hands, and he understood, with the cold clarity that came to him in the moments that mattered, that a battle had just been declared in this cold little hall, and that the woman he had come for was somewhere above them, shut away from him by a sister who had every reason in the world to keep them apart, and who was, even now, calculating exactly how to do it. "I am glad it is only a chill," Adrian said, and he bowed, and his courtesy was perfect and terrible. "Then I shall not disturb her rest. But you will tell her, Sir Henry, that Mr. Marsh called to ask after her. Mr. Marsh, that is the name she knows me by, and she will understand it, and that he hopes very much to walk with her again, the moment she is recovered. Will you tell her that? Exactly that?" "Mr. Marsh," Sir Henry repeated, hopelessly confused now, glancing between his daughter and the Duke. "Yes, yes, your Grace." "Mr. Marsh." "Adrian," said the Duke, "she will want the whole of it." And he looked once, deliberately, up the stairs, toward the closed dormware above, behind which he did not yet know whether Cordelia Verrall lay ill or merely imprisoned by a sister's fear, and then he turned, and let himself out into the cold, and climbed into his carriage, and did not drive away at once. He sat a long while in the drive of that shabby house, looking up at its blind windows, and he thought about the look on Rosamund Verrall's face, the swift cold waking he had seen behind her smile. He had made an enemy this morning. He knew it as plainly as he knew his own name. He had walked into that house as himself, revealed the whole astonishing truth, and by doing so he had turned the sister's careless contempt into something far more dangerous, a rival's desperate, cornered resolve. She would not let her plain sister take the prize she had counted her own. She would fight, and she had every weapon a sister has, proximity and knowledge, and a father who could be managed, and a whole society ready to believe that of course the Duke meant the beauty, that any talk of the other was a mistake, a jest, a passing whim to be quietly corrected. Adrian looked up at the closed window one last time, then he rapped on the roof of the carriage. "Netherford," he told the coachman, "and on the way, we will call at the vicarage. I find I am suddenly a great deal more interested in the affairs of this parish than I was an hour ago." He was, after all, a careful man, and a careful man, once he has decided what he wants, does not charge the field. He lays his siege. The vicar of Netherford was an elderly man named Mr. Pettibone, kind and gossipy and poor, who had christened both Verrall girls and buried their mother, and who received the Duke of Eastmere in his study with a fluster that gradually gave way, under Adrian's grave and patient questioning, to the loose and loving talk of an old man asked about people he has cared for all their lives. Adrian listened. He was very good at listening. It was, he had come to think, the most underrated of a great man's arts, for men told a listener things they would never have told a questioner, and from Mr. Pettibone, over a glass of thin sherry, he learned the last of what he needed to know. He learned that Cordelia Verrell had nursed her mother through the long final illness while her sister was sent away, at 14, to be spared the sight of it. He learned that she taught 3 of the poorest children of the parish their letters, on Sunday afternoons, without payment or notice, in the cold vestry. He learned that when the miller's wife had lain 3 days in a hard labour, and the fee for the surgeon could not be found, it was Cordelia who had somehow found it, out of accounts that had no slack in them anywhere, and had never told a soul, and that Mr. Pettibone knew of it only because the miller's wife had wept it out to him at her churching. She is the finest young woman in this parish. Your Grace, the old vicar said, and his voice trembled, and the only one who has never once been thanked for it, and I have prayed, God forgive an old man his meddling, I have prayed some good man would see it before she grows old in that cold house. Keeping other people's accounts and never keeping any joy of her own, I confess I had ceased to hope of it. She is not, the world does not look at Cordelia. The world looks at Rosamond. He peered at the Duke over his spectacles, and something shrewd and hopeful woke in his rheumy eyes. Might I ask, your Grace, without impertinence, what is your interest in the elder Miss Verrell? You may ask, Adrian said. I intend to marry her if she will have me. And I begin to think, Mr. Pettibone, that she may not have me, that she is far too sensible to want a duke, and far too proud to be lifted, and that I shall have to be a great deal cleverer than I have ever needed to be in my life. Will you help me? The old vicar set down his sherry with a hand that shook and looked at the Duke of Eastmere for a long moment, and then he began quietly to laugh, not mockingly, but with a kind of overflowing wonder. The laugh of a man who has prayed a long time for a thing, and is startled to find the answer sitting in his shabby study drinking his bad sherry. Your Grace, he said, I have christened, married, and buried the souls of this parish for 40 years, and I have never once been asked to help a duke court a poor girl against the world. I would help you if you were the devil himself. What do you need? A little, Adrian said. For now, only this. A note carried by a hand her sister will not think to watch. Cordelia Verrell was not, in fact, so very ill. She had taken a genuine chill on the river that 5th grey dawn, a real and streaming cold that had kept her, that first morning, honestly in her bed. But she was mending fast, as strong, healthy people mend, and would have been up and about by the 2nd day had not Rosamond, swindily, with a solicitude that would have deceived anyone who did not know her, insisted that she keep to her room, brought her broth she did not want, plumped her pillows, and turned with soft, implacable firmness every collar from the door. Cordelia was not a fool. She had grown over these strange, bright mornings on the river, accustomed to a happiness she had not dared examine too closely, the happiness of a man walking beside her who listened, who laughed at her dry jokes, who looked at her, plain Cordelia, as though she were worth the losing of a morning. She had not told herself his name might be more than plain Mr. Marsh. She had not let herself. A poor woman who lets herself hope is a poor woman preparing herself to be broken, and Cordelia had made a life's discipline of not being broken. But she knew that on the 5th morning she had failed to come, and that a walking companion of any warmth would have inquired, and she knew that no word had reached her. And she began, lying in her narrow bed listening to her sister's unusually attentive footsteps on the stairs, to suspect that something was being kept from her. The note came on the 2nd afternoon of her confinement, folded small, carried in the apron pocket of the little maid Betsy, who had been stopped in the lane by the old vicar himself and pressed to carry it, and who was too frightened of both Rosamond and God to know whom to obey, and had settled the matter by obeying the one who had given her a shilling. Cordelia unfolded it with cold fingers. Miss Verrell, it read, in a strong, black, unhurried hand. You did not come to the river, and I have been to Thornleigh to learn why, and I find that a chill has been made into a fortress, and that you are guarded more closely than the Bank of England. I will not force your door. I am not that kind of man. But I cannot let you believe I did not come, or did not care that you were not there. I came. I cared. I care a great deal more than I have any right to, on the strength of 5 mornings' acquaintance, and I mean to go on caring whether it is wise or not. I owe you a confession, and I would rather make it to your face than in ink, but your sister has made your face difficult to reach, so ink must serve. My name is Adrian Marsh, which is true. But is not the whole of my name, and I let you take me for less than I am, because I was weary to the bone of being courted for the more, and I wished, selfishly, I know it, to be known by you as a man before I was known as a title. I am the Duke of Eastmere. I am the man your neighborhood believes came to court your sister. It came to court no one. It came to be bored, as I am always bored, and instead it found you, and has not been bored or lonely or half so foolish for a single hour since. I understand if you are angry that I kept it back. You have every right to be. But I could not let another day pass with you believing yourself forgotten. When you are well, truly well, and not merely permitted to be well, I will be on the river path every morning at the middle until you come. Come when you choose. Come never if you must. But know that I am there, and that I would rather walk one more grey morning beside you than dance a lifetime of ballrooms with any other woman alive. Cordelia, read it 3 times. Then she folded it very small, and she pressed the back of one hand against her mouth, and she lay for a long time quite still in her cold room, while the November light moved slowly across the ceiling. She was not a woman given to weeping, and she did not weep now. But something in her chest, some door she had kept locked and bolted for a great many years, the door behind which she had put away at 19, the whole idea that anyone might ever come for her, that door was straining now against its bolts, and it terrified her. Because a thing that has been bolted so long can break a person coming open. A duke, the Duke of Eastmere, the man her sister had built a whole future upon, the man the county had married to Rosamond in every drawing-room for a fortnight. That man had walked 5 grey mornings beside plain Cordelia Verrell in a country coat, and had let her scold him, and had laughed at her jokes, and had come to her house, and had written it found you, and has not been bored, or lonely, or half so foolish, for a single hour since. It was not possible. It was the beginning of every cruel joke that had ever been played on a plain woman. Build her up, let her hope, and let her fall the further. Her whole hard-won sense told her to burn the note and stay in her bed and never go near the river again, and so keep herself safe. But she thought of the man on the path, of the way he had laughed, rusty and startled, when she caught him in his lie about being lost. Of the way he had said, "No one has told you that you are being kind to," and then, she saw it now, she saw the whole of it now, had set about, morning after morning, being kind to her, not grandly, not with gifts or flattery, just by coming, by listening, by being for 1 hour a day the person who had told her she was worth it. And Cordelia Verrell, who had made a life's discipline of not being broken, discovered that there is a courage greater than the courage of never hoping, and that is the courage of hoping anyway, with your eyes open, knowing exactly what it may cost you. She got up. She was, after all, quite well. She did not go to the river the next morning, for it was too soon and she was too shaken, and she wished, before she saw him again, to have a full command of herself. But she came downstairs, dressed and steady, into a household that had believed her safely shut away, and she found that in her absence a campaign had been mounted. Rosamond was at the writing desk in the cold parlour, and she looked up when Cordelia entered, and the 2 sisters regarded each other across the little room with a new and honest knowledge between them, the pretence of the sick-room fallen away. "So," Rosamond said, "you are recovered. How fortunate." She set down her pen. She was, Cordelia saw, quite composed, the frightened, cornered flair of the first day mastered now, put away, replaced by something cooler and more dangerous, strategy. "I suppose you had his little note." "I could not stop that. The vicar's a meddling old fool, and Betsy is a traitor and will be turned off. But I want you to listen to me, Cordelia, and I want you to listen as your sister who loves you, because I do love you, whatever you may think." "I am listening," Cordelia said. "He is a duke," Rosamond said, "the Duke of Eastmere. Do you understand what that means? He has 40,000 a year and estates in 3 counties and a seat in the Lords and a great house in town where the king himself has dined. Men like that do not marry women like us, like you." She said it not cruelly now, but earnestly, leaning forward, and that earnestness was worse than any sneer. They amused themselves. A plain, clever girl on a country path. It is a novelty to him, a change from the diamonds who bore him. He will walk with you and flatter you, and you will fall in love with him. Because how could you not, a woman who has never had a man look twice? And then he will go back to town when the novelty pales, and marry an earl's daughter, and you will be left a ruined joke. The plain Varel who thought a duke meant it, and it will finish us. Do you understand? The scandal will finish what little standing this family has left, and we will not even have my beauty to trade upon, because who will marry the sister of a girl a duke used and threw over? Cordelia was silent. For the words found the exact place her own fear had already carved, and pressed upon it, and it was all the more terrible for being possible. Let me have him, Rosamond said softly, and now at last the truth of it came out bare. It is not so much to ask. You have your books and your river and your quiet, and you do not even like society, you have said so 100 times. I have nothing but this one chance, this one face, and it is fading, Cordelia. I feel it fading. I am 22 and I have perhaps 3 seasons left before I am shelved beside you. Let me have him. I will make him love me. I know how, I have always known how, and I will marry him, and I will mend us all, and you shall come and live in my great house and keep my books and never want for anything again. Is that not better? Is that not sense? You have always been the sensible one. And Cordelia Varel looked at her beautiful, frightened, ruthless sister, and understood 2 things at once with perfect clarity. The first was that Rosamond believed every word she said. She was not lying. She truly thought this the kind and sensible arrangement, the plain sister stepping aside, the beauty taking the prize, the world set back into its proper shape. She had lived so long inside the certainty that faces were fortunes that she could not conceive of a duke choosing otherwise, and so she was not even, in her own eyes, doing wrong. She was correcting a mistake, and the second thing Cordelia understood was that she was not going to step aside. Not because she believed the duke, she did not, quite even now. The wound of a lifetime does not close in an afternoon. But because a man had written her a letter that said, I would rather walk one more grey morning beside you than dance a lifetime of ballrooms, and whatever came of it, however it ended, she was done, spending her life stepping aside so that Rosamond's light might shine the brighter. She had turned pages and fetched shawls and balanced impossible books and asked nothing, and she would go on doing all of it gladly, for she loved to be useful and did not resent it. But she would not step out of her own life. Not this once. No, Cordelia said. Rosamond blinked. It was, Cordelia realized, the first time in either of their lives that she had refused her sister anything at all. No, Cordelia said again more steadily. I am sorry, Rosamond, truly. I know you are frightened, and I know why, and I am sorrier than I can say that our mother's fortune is gone, and that your face has had to carry us all. But I will not tell him a lie for you, and I will not pretend to a man She stopped and steadied herself and went on, to a man who has been kind to me, that I do not wish to walk with him. If he is toying with me, as you say, then I shall find it out, and I shall be no worse off than I was, for I never expected anything, and I shall want for nothing I have not always wanted for. But I will find it out myself, from him. I will not have it decided for me in this parlour by you before it has even begun. She turned to go. At the door she stopped and looked back and said, for she was, whatever else, a just woman, and if it comes to nothing, Rosamond, and he does prove false, I will not stand in your way. I promise you that. If he is what you say, you may have him and welcome, and I will help you catch him, and I will keep your books in your great house and be glad of it. But let it be the truth that decides it, not our fear. We have both of us lived too long inside our fear. And she went out and left her sister sitting at the cold writing desk, and Rosamond Varel sat very still for a long moment, and then she picked up her pen again and drew a fresh sheet toward her and began, because she was frightened and cornered, and cleverer than she was kind, to write a letter of her own. Adrian was on the river path the next morning, and the one after, and the one after that, at the middle, as he had promised. He came in his plain country coat, though the whole neighbourhood now knew him for the Duke, because it seemed to him a small honesty he could offer her, that he would meet her still as the man she had first walked beside, and not as the title that had come between them. On the 3rd morning she came. He saw her from a long way off, a small grey figure on the long grey path, and he made himself stand quite still and not go to meet her, because he sensed that she needed to cover that distance herself at her own pace, of her own choosing. That every step she took toward him was a thing she was deciding, and that he must not take a single one of those decisions from her. So he stood and waited, while the cold river ran between them and a heron lifted off the water, and the woman he loved walked the whole long way to him with her chin up and her market basket on her arm and her heart. He could see even at that distance, in her throat. She stopped a few feet from him. For a moment neither spoke. "Your Grace," she said at last. "Adrian," he said. "You called me Adrian in your thoughts when you read the letter. I know you did. It cost you something to come here this morning, Cordelia, and I will not let you pay that price and then hide behind my title for safety. Call me by my name. I have not many people left in the world who do." Her mouth trembled, that grave mouth he had learned to watch for the ancestor of a smile. "You are very sure of what I thought when I read your letter." "No," he said. "I am not sure of anything, for the first time in 11 years, and I find it is the most alive I have felt in all that time. I am not sure you will forgive me the deception. I am not sure you can bring yourself to believe a duke means it. When a duke's meaning it must sound to you like the beginning of a cruelty. I am not sure of anything at all, except that I came and I cared, and I would do it all again." He paused. "Will you walk with me, Cordelia?" "As we did before, and I will answer any question you put to me, however hard, and I will not lie to you again, not by so much as a country coat, for the rest of my life." And so they walked, and she put her questions to him, hard ones, unsparing ones, the questions of a woman who is resolved not to be a fool, and he answered every one of them plainly. She asked him whether she was a novelty, as her sister said, a change from the diamonds who bored him, and he was quiet a moment, and then he said, "Yes, you are a change from the diamonds, but not the way she means. A man does not marry a novelty, Cordelia, he tires of it. I do not tire of you. I have spent 5 mornings and 3 days apart from you, finding that I think of you at all hours, that I compose remarks to make you laugh while I am shaving, that the whole of my great tedious managed life looks, from where I stand beside you, like a house I was only waiting to leave. That is not novelty. I know the difference. I am 38 and I have been bored by experts." She asked him whether he understood what it would cost him, that his aunts would be appalled, his equals astonished, the whole of society ranged against a duke who married a portionless nobody, that he would be laughed at, he the Duke of Eastmere, for choosing plain Cordelia Verrel over every diamond in the kingdom. And Adrian stopped walking and turned to her and said, "Let me tell you what I understand. I understand that I have been the most sought-after man in 3 counties for 11 years, and all that time not one living soul has sought me. They have sought my title, my income, my houses, the reflected shine of my name on their own. I have been my whole adult life invisible behind the Duke, exactly as you have been invisible behind your sister. We are the same, Cordelia, in this one strange way. We have both of us been overlooked, you for being too little and I for being too much, and neither of us has ever once been chosen for our own selves by another human being. Until now." His voice was very low. "You did not know I was a duke when you scolded me for lying about being lost. You did not know it when you told me your sister was frightened and forgave her for it. You knew nothing of my 40,000 a year, and you looked at me anyway, and you laughed at me, and you argued with me, and you let me walk beside you, you who let no one walk beside you. Do you understand what that is to a man who has been a title so long he had half forgotten he was a man? You saw me. You are the only person alive who has ever seen me. Society may laugh itself hoarse. I have found the one thing I did not know I was starving for, and I will give it up to spare the feelings of people who have never once cared for mine." And Cordelia Verrel, standing on the cold riverbank, looked up into the face of the Duke of Eastmere, and the door she had kept bolted for a great many years came quietly, finally, all the way open, and she did not break. She let it open, and she found that she was still standing, still herself, only larger somehow and warmer, and no longer alone. "I believe you," she said. It came out barely above the sound of the river. "God help me, Adrian, against all my sense, I believe you." He did not kiss her. It was too soon, and the river path was too public, and she was too precious to be hurried. But he took her hand, the ungloved, work-roughened, capable hand that had balanced impossible books and found impossible fees and turned friendless pages, and he raised it to his lips. And he held it there a long moment, and when he lifted his head his eyes were not quite dry, and neither, though she would have died before she admitted it, were hers. "Then let me court you," he said. "Properly. openly. Not on a hidden path, but before the whole county, so that no one may ever say I was ashamed of you, or that I hid you, or that I toyed with you in the dark. Let me come to Thornley as your suitor, before your father, and let the neighborhood say what it likes. Will you let me, Cordelia? They will be very cruel to you, she said. They have been cruel to you for 24 years, he said, and you have borne it with more grace than I could summon in a lifetime. I think I may endure a few months of it, with you to teach me how. She laughed then, a real laugh. Surprised out of her, bright and unguarded as the private happiness he had glimpsed that first morning under the singing robin, and it was, Adrian thought, the finest sound he had ever heard, and he resolved on the spot to spend the rest of his life provoking it as often as he possibly could. The county did not know what to make of it. That the Duke of Eastmere had taken rooms at Netherford was known, that had been assumed to signal an interest in the beautiful Miss Rosamond Verrell, and had set every matchmaking mother's teeth on edge and every gossip's tongue wagging with delighted envy. But when it became known, as such things always become known, that the Duke was calling openly at Thornley, and walking openly with a Miss Verrell, and being received openly by Sir Henry as a suitor, and that the Miss Verrell in question was not the Diamond Rosamond, but the plain, portionless 24 elder sister, the county's bewilderment curdled into something close to outrage. It was not to be borne. It was not to be believed. A duke, the duke, with all the beauty and fortune of the kingdom to choose from, courting a nobody? A grey, bookish spinster who had never had an offer, whom Rosamond Verrell herself had held up to Lord Hartwell's whole drawing-room as the very type of the unmarriageable. There must be some mistake. There must be some scheme. Cordelia Verrell must have entrapped him somehow cunningly, the sly clever creature, for the world, faced with a good man's free and generous choice, will always sooner believe in a woman's trickery than a woman's worth. Adrian heard it all, and cared nothing for it, and moved through it with the massive, unhurried indifference of a man too great to be touched by the buzzing of small people. By doing so, he shielded her. For that was the thing he had understood from the first, standing at Lord Hartwell's fire, that a duke's attention was a heavy thing, capable of crushing where it meant to warm, but that a duke's steadiness was heavier still, and could shelter what it stood over. Every day that he called at Thornley without wavering, every drawing-room he entered with Cordelia's defence ready on his tongue, every cut he returned with a courtesy so perfect it left the cutter looking like the fool. Each of these laid another stone in the wall he was building around her. Patiently, the way he did everything, until the county began, grudgingly, against all its inclination, to grasp that the Duke of Eastmere was in deadly earnest, and that to sneer at Cordelia Verrell was now to sneer at a duke, and that this was a luxury very few of them could afford. But Rosamond Verrell could afford it, and Rosamond Verrell had written a letter. She had written it to the one person in the world whose disapproval could still, she calculated, undo the whole thing, the Duke's aunt, the Dowager Countess of Marchburn, his late mother's elder sister, a formidable old woman of iron principle and iron pride who had, since the death of his mother, appointed herself the guardian of the Eastmere dignity, and who lived, in state and grievance, some 40 miles distant. Rosamond's letter was a small masterpiece of poison poured through honey. She did not accuse, she lamented. She wrote as a distressed young gentlewoman riding in anguish to the only person who might save her family from ruin and the noble house of Eastmere from a dreadful misalliance. She had, she wrote, tried everything to check her poor sister's presumption. Cordelia, she was heartbroken to say it of her own flesh, had schemed and connived to entrap the Duke, had thrown herself in his path morning after morning, had worked upon a good man's kindness until he scarcely knew his own mind. The whole family was mortified. The whole county was scandalized. And she, Rosamond, wrote in desperate hope that her ladyship, who alone had influence over the Duke, might intervene before he threw away his name and his dignity upon a portionless, plotting nobody who would disgrace the Eastmere line and be laughed at in every drawing-room in the kingdom. It was clever. It was very clever, for Rosamond had grasped the one truth that Cordelia's whole worth could not answer, that the world will forgive a great man almost anything except folding low, and that the surest way to break a duke's marriage is not to attack the woman, but to shame the man, to make him feel, in the marrow of his pride, that he is a laughing-stock. And the Dowager Countess of Marchburn, reading that letter over her morning chocolate 40 miles away, set down her cup with a click that made her companion jump, and rang for her carriage, and announced that she would go at once to Netherford and put a stop to this madness before her sister's son made the family a byword from London to the sea. She arrived at the inn at Netherford 4 days later, in a black travelling coach with the Marchburn arms on the door, trailing dignity and outrage, and sent up her card to the Duke with a note that said, in a spiky underlined hand, that she desired the favour of a private interview upon a matter touching the honour of his house, and that she trusted he would not keep his mother's sister waiting. Adrian read the note and knew at once, with a sinking certainty, exactly what it meant and who had summoned it. He looked out the window of his rooms at the black coach in the inn yard, and he thought of Cordelia and of the wall he had been so patiently building around her, and he understood that it was about to be tested by the heaviest siege engine his own family could bring against it. "Show her ladyship up," he said to the servant, and then, quietly to himself in the empty room, "It begins in earnest." He was after all a careful man and a great one, and he had not become the 9th Duke of Eastmere by flinching from formidable old women. But as he stood to receive his aunt, he found his hand had gone, without his willing it, to the breast of his coat, to the pocket where he had taken to carrying, folded small, the first note Cordelia had ever sent him in return. 3 lines only in her clear accountant's hand, that said, "I will come to the river on Thursday. I am bringing the harder questions I did not think of yesterday. Do not imagine you are forgiven the coat. CV." He pressed his hand flat against it once, the way a soldier touches a talisman before a charge. Then he squared his shoulders and turned to the door, and prepared to defend the only thing he had ever wanted from the whole massed weight of everything he had. There was, before ever the Dowager's black coach came grinding into the inn yard, a fortnight of open courtship that Adrian would remember all his life as the truest apprenticeship he had ever served, the apprenticeship of learning how to be loved for himself, which was a harder trade than he had supposed, and one at which he had had, at 38, no practice at all. For it had come to him, walking the river those first open mornings, that he did not in truth know how it was done. He had been a duke so long that he had forgotten there was any other way to move through the world than to be deferred to. He had been flattered so long that he had lost the knack of plain talk, and Cordelia Verrell, bless her unsparing honesty, would have none of the duke and all of the man, and set about, with a directness that both stung and delighted him, teaching him the difference. She would not let him give her things. That was the first lesson and the hardest. He had meant, in the natural way of a great man who has found something precious, to shower her with a horse of her own, so she need not walk the 2 miles to the library, with a maid so she need not do the marketing, with silks and books and 100 easings of a life he could see had been too hard too long. And she thanked him and refused nearly all of it, gently but without the smallest wavering. "You must understand something, Adrian," she said on the 3rd such morning, when he had pressed upon her, half in earnest, a little mare he had seen and thought would suit her. "If I take these things now, before we are married, then the whole county's story becomes true. I become the poor girl who let the rich duke buy her, and every gift you give me is another sentence in the tale they are already telling. But there is a worse reason, and I will tell it you plainly because you have earned plain speaking." She stopped on the path and faced him. "I have kept myself and my father, and that whole sinking house, by my own 2 hands and my own hard head for 5 years, and no one has ever once helped me, and it has cost me a great deal, and it is also the thing I am proudest of in all the world. It is mine. If you begin now, before there is any bond between us, to lift every weight off me and smooth every road, then you will have taken from me the one thing no one could take before, the knowledge that I did it. Do you see? I do not want to be rescued. I have never wanted to be rescued. I want to be chosen, which is an entirely different thing, and I think perhaps the whole difference between us and the rest of the world is that no one has ever troubled to learn that a woman might want the second and not the first." Adrian looked at her a long moment, and then he took back the offer of the mare, and did not make another, and understood that he had just been given the most important instruction of his life by a woman in a made-over cloak on a cold riverbank. "I have spent 11 years, he said slowly, "having people want things from me. My money, my name, my notice. I do not think it had occurred to me that a person might want nothing from me at all, might want only me, and want besides to keep her own dignity intact while she had me. I have been surrounded by wanting my whole life, Cordelia, and I have been the loneliest man in 3 counties, and I begin to understand tonight that those 2 facts were the same fact. He shook his head, half laughing at himself. You are going to be very inconvenient to be married to. You will refuse me things for the whole of my life on the grounds that I love you too much. I sure, she agreed. Constantly, you had far better resign yourself to it now. The second lesson was that she would argue with him, which no one had done in 11 years, and that he had not known how starved he was for it. They argued about everything, about the management of estates, on which she had firm and well-founded opinions drawn from having wrung a sinking one dry of its last penny, about books of which she had read astonishingly many and remembered all, about the poor of the parish, about whom she knew more than his entire staff of stewards put together, having been one whisker from poor herself, about whether a certain bridge in the village wanted mending, on which she was proved comprehensively right, and he comprehensively wrong to his enormous and unaccustomed pleasure. For a duke is told he is right of everything, always, by everyone, and a duke who is never contradicted slowly ceases to think at all, and Adrian found, sparring with Cordelia Varell over a village bridge, that his own mind had come awake in his skull after a decade's sleep, and that he had missed it more than he could say. Do you know, he told Colonel Ferris, who came down from town once to see for himself the wonder the whole world was talking of, and stayed to dine, and went away converted. She told me flatly this morning that I was a fool about the enclosure at Hartley, and she was right. And I cannot remember when I was last so happy as I was being called a fool by a woman who had the figures to prove it. 11 years, Ferris. 11 years of yes, your grace, and quite so, your grace, and how very wise, your grace. And I did not know I was drowning in it until she threw me a rope made of pure contradiction. Ferris, who had watched his friend go grey and quiet and remote across a decade, looked at the man across the table, animated, arguing, laughing his rusty, startled laugh over a plate of Netherford mutton, and said only quietly, "Marry her quickly, Marsh, before the world talks you out of the best thing that has ever happened to you. I have not seen you alive since your father died. Marry her quickly and let the county choke." And the third lesson, the deepest, came on the last morning of that fortnight, before the shadow of the ball had fallen, when Cordelia stopped on the river path at the exact spot where he had first pretended to be lost, and tauntingly, for it went against every discipline of a lifetime, the thing she had never told a living soul. "I stopped hoping," she said, looking at the water and not at him. "You should know it before you tie yourself to me. Somewhere about my 20th year I understood that no one was going to come, and I made a decision, I suppose, though it did not feel like one. I decided I would not want what I could not have, because wanting it was too much like being cut over and over in the same place. So I put it away. All of it. The whole idea that I might be chosen, loved, seen. I put it in a room and I locked the door, and I built my life in the other rooms, the useful ones, the safe ones, and I was not unhappy. I want you to know I was not unhappy. I had my books and my river and my robin, and I told myself it was enough, and most days it was. She turned to him then, and her grey eyes were bright and unguarded. And then you came, and you would not stop coming, and you knocked and knocked at that locked door. It came open, I have to tell you, and I have to tell you, it's being loved, after so long hurts, the way a limb hurts when the blood comes back into it. I did not know it would hurt. No one warns you, and I would not go back, not for anything in the world, but you must not imagine I am only glad. I am glad and I am terrified, both at once, all the time, and I will be for a long while yet, and if you cannot bear a wife who flinches sometimes at her own good fortune, you had better find it out now and go. And Adrian Marsh, who had learned in one short fortnight more about the human heart than in his whole managed life before, did not tell her she was foolish to hurt, and did not promise to make it stop, for he had learned by now that she despised false comfort. He only took her cold hand in both of his, there at the exact spot where it had all begun, and held it against his heart until she could feel it beating, and said, "Then we shall flinch together, and be terrified together, and let the blood come back into both of us together, however long it takes. I have my own locked rooms, Cordelia. I have been afraid to be wanted for myself for so long I made a fortress of my whole life and lived in it alone. We are neither of us undamaged, but I would rather ache my way back to life beside you than stay safely numb in the finest house in England. Flinch as much as you like. I am not going anywhere. I have crossed too much cold country to reach the middle of this path, and I mean to stand in it with you until we are both old. She did not answer. She only turned her face into his shoulder, there in the open, on the river path, in the plain sight of anyone who cared to look, and the Duke of Eastmere stood holding the woman no one would ever choose, in the grey morning light, while the river ran on beside them exactly as it had for 1,000 years, indifferent, eternal, and utterly unimpressed by titles. And he thought that he had never in his life been anywhere he would less willingly leave. The Dowager Countess of Marchburn came into the room like weather. She was a small woman, upright as a fire iron, dressed in the deep, unrelieved black she had worn for 20 years, and she carried an ebony cane she did not need for walking and used entirely for emphasis. She did not sit when Adrian offered her a chair. She planted the cane before her, folded both hands upon it, and regarded her sister's son with a pair of dark eyes so exactly like his own that the resemblance was almost comical. "Adrian," she said, "I have driven 40 miles over shocking roads to ask you a single question, and I will thank you to answer it as your mother's son and not as a duke, since I have never in my life been impressed by dukes and do not propose to begin with a boy I have seen in his cradle. Is it true?" "Aunt Augusta," he said, and bowed over her hand with a real affection, for he did in fact love the terrifying old woman, and knew that she loved him. "You are looking magnificent, and you have not aged a day, and yes, it is true. I mean to marry Miss Cordelia Verrell, and I am very glad you have come, for I would far rather tell you myself than have you learn it from that poisonous letter, which I perceive you have received, and which I perceive is the whole reason for those shocking roads." The dowager's eyes narrowed. "You know of the letter." "I know its author," Adrian said. "I know her hand. She has been writing herself into a great house for 2 years, and she wrote you the moment she understood I meant to marry her sister instead of her. Sit down, aunt, please. There is a great deal you do not know, and I find I very much want you, of all people, to know it." She did not sit, but she did not leave. And Adrian, who had answered Cordelia's hard questions on the river bank, now answered his aunt's harder ones, for the dowager's questions were not a rival's. They were a guardian's, and they went to the bone. She asked him whether the girl had money. None, he said. Whether she had beauty. Not, he said, of the kind the world counts, and a great deal of the kind it does not. Whether she had family, connection, anything at all to bring to the alliance of a duke. Nothing, he said, but herself, and that he had weighed against every diamond and heiress paraded before him for 11 years, and found the whole glittering lot of them wanting. "You are 38, the dowager said. "You are the last of your line. Your father and your grandfather and 6 dukes before them built the name you carry, and you propose to marry it to a portionless nobody a scheming sister calls a plotter, and be laughed at from here to London, and hand your ancient house to the children of a bankrupt baronet. Have you lost your reason? Speak to me plainly, Adrian. I have buried a husband and a sister and every friend of my youth, and I am too old to be managed. Why?" And Adrian Marsh looked at his fierce old aunt, and he told her the plain truth, the whole of it, more plainly than he had ever told anyone anything. He told her about the 11 years of being sought and never chosen. He told her about the drawing-room at Hartwell Court, and the voice like a blade across silk, and the woman who had gone still by the window, and had lifted her chin, and had not wept. He told her about the river, and the country coat, and the 5 mornings, and the scolding, and the laughter he had not known was still in him. He told her about the miller's wife, and the friendless pianist, and the children taught their letters in a cold vestry with no one watching. He told her, his voice going low and unguarded in a way it never did, that he had reached the middle of his life a rich and titled and entirely solitary man, invisible behind his own name, and that a plain woman with a market basket had looked straight through the name and seen him, and laughed at him, and let him walk beside her, and that he was not going to give that up, not for the name, not for the county, not for the whole House of Lords, not, he said it gently, even for her Augusta, whom he loved. So you may forbid it if you like, he finished, and I will still marry her. You may cut me if you like, and I will grieve it, for I love you and always have, but I will not give her up. I have been overlooked my whole life, the same as she has, only from the other side of it, too great to be seen, as she was too small, and we have found each other in the middle, and I would sooner be laughed at with her than admired without her for the rest of my days. That is the whole of my reason. It is the only reason I have. I know it will not weigh with the world. I find, to my very great surprise, that the world has stopped weighing with me. There was a long silence in the room. The Dowager Countess of Marchburn stood very still, her hands folded on her cane, her dark eyes, his mother's eyes, fixed on her sister's son, and something moved behind them that Adrian could not read. "Sit down," she said at last, "and ring for tea, and stop looming at me like your father, who was a good man and a dreadful bore. I wish to think." And she sat, finally, in the offered chair, small and upright and black, and she thought, while the tea came and went, and Adrian, who had learned patience at her own knee, let her think and did not interrupt. "I loved a man once," the Dowager said abruptly, when the tea was cold, "who was not thought suitable. Before your uncle, a younger son with no prospects and a great laugh and no dignity whatever. My family stopped it. They were quite right too, by every rule the world keeps. He had nothing, and I had a name to think of, and I married Marchburn instead, who was suitable and dull and kind enough, and I was a good wife to him for 30 years, and never told a living soul that I had once loved a man who made me laugh." She looked into the cold tea. "He is 40 years dead, and I have never once stopped being sorry. That is the thing they do not tell you, Adrian, when they teach you to marry suitably. They do not tell you that a name keeps you warm about as well as a marble slab, and that you will lie awake at 70 remembering a laugh you gave away to keep it." She lifted her eyes to his, and they were bright and hard, and he saw with astonishment wet. "I did not drive 40 miles to bless this," she said. "I drove 40 miles to stop it, because I am an old fool who learned nothing from her own life and was ready to teach you her own mistake. But I have looked at your face while you spoke of your accountant girl with her market basket, and it is a face I have not seen on you since you were a boy, and I am too near my own grave to help a young man dig the one I dug for myself." She struck the floor once with her cane. Decisively, the argument closed. Marry her. Marry her and be laughed at and be happy, which is more than your title ever made you and more than your name will ever be worth. I shall come to the wedding, and I shall wear my diamonds, and I shall dare one single soul in that church to smirk at my nephew's bride, and I promise you, Adrian, that soul will regret it to the end of its days. Now, when do I meet her? For I warn you, if she is a fortune hunter after all, and you a besotted fool, I shall know it in 10 minutes, and I shall say so." Adrian, who had braced his whole self for a battle, found himself instead crossing the room to kiss his fierce old aunt's cheek, and could not, for a moment, trust his voice to speak. Thursday he managed at last. "She walks on the river Thursday. Come and be introduced and judge for yourself, and I promise you will not need 10 minutes. You will need 1. The Dowager met Cordelia Verrel on the river path that Thursday, and it did not take her 10 minutes, and it did not take her 1. It took the length of a single exchange. For the Dowager, being the Dowager, opened with a test, a cool, cutting, deliberately provoking remark, designed to see whether the girl would cringe or fawn or scheme or crack. "So," she said, planting her cane, looking Cordelia up and down through her glass, "you are the young person who has caught my nephew. You are not at all what I was led to expect. I was told you were a schemer. I see only a rather tired young woman in a made-over gown. Which is the truth of you, I wonder? Come, don't stammer at me. I cannot abide a stammerer." And Cordelia Verrel, who had faced her sister's cruelty for 24 years and been sharpened rather than broken by it, looked the terrifying old woman calmly in the eye and said, "The made-over gown is certainly the truth of me, your ladyship. I turned it myself last spring, and the seams are stronger than they look, which is more than can be said for most made-over things. As for the schemer, I am afraid I must disappoint the report. If I had the smallest talent for scheming, my father's estate should not be in the state it is in. and I should have caught a comfortable clergyman years ago and spared everyone this trouble. I have no scheme, ma'am. I have only a great deal of unwelcome common sense, and a duke who will not listen to any of it, and who I have told repeatedly that he is making a mistake he will be laughed at for. He does not attend. I find him quite the most obstinate man I have ever met, and I include my father, who once bought a horse he was allergic to because it looked well in the paddock. There was a silence. And then the Dowager Countess of Marchburn threw back her head and laughed, great harsh, delighted crack of laughter that startled the heron off the water and echoed down the whole grey river, and she seized Cordelia Verrell's ungloved hand in both her own, and she said, "Oh, you will do. You will do beautifully. My dear child, I came here to save my nephew from you, and I find instead I must save you from him, for he does not deserve you and never will, and I am going to enjoy telling him so at every dinner for the rest of my life. A horse he was allergic to. Come and sit with me, I insist upon it. I have not laughed like that in a decade, and I mean to have the whole story of the horse." And so the Duke of Eastmere, standing a little apart on the river path, watched his fierce guardian aunt and his grave beloved walk off arm in arm along the water, their heads bent together, the old woman's harsh laughter ringing out again and again, and he understood that the heaviest siege engine his family could bring against him had just changed sides entirely, and now stood squarely in the wall around Cordelia. Black diamonds and ebony cane and 40 years of grievance all at her back. He should have known then that it was going too well. For Rosamond Verrell, when the news reached her, that the Dowager had come to stop the match and had stayed to champion it, that the terrible old aunt now called Cordelia my dear child, that the last door she had thought to slam was standing wide, Rosamond understood that her honeyed poison had failed, and that persuasion was finished, and that if she meant to stop this thing, she would have to do more than write letters. She would have to make it impossible. She would have to strike at the one thing even a duke's love could not mend, at Cordelia's honour, before the whole county, in a way that could never be taken back. And there was to be, in 3 weeks' time, the great winter ball at Hartwell Court, the largest gathering of the season, to which the whole county would come, and to which the Duke of Eastmere would come, and to which he had let it be known he would bring, openly, as his intended, Miss Cordelia Verrell. It was to be her presentation, her triumph, the night the plain sister walked into the very room where she had been laughed at, on the arm of the greatest man in 3 counties, and was honoured before them all. Rosamond Verrell looked at that ball, coming toward her like a lit ship, and she began, coldly and carefully, in the small hours of the night when even her fear could not sleep, to plan how to sink it. The 3 weeks before the winter ball were the happiest of Adrian's life, which was, he would think afterward, precisely why he did not see the blow coming. He called at Thornleigh every day. He sat in the cold parlour with Sir Henry, who had recovered from his bewilderment enough to be simply, helplessly delighted, and who loved the Duke now with the uncritical devotion of a man to whom a miracle has been given without his having to deserve it. He walked the river with Cordelia in all weathers. He brought his aunt to dine, and the 2 women grew thick as thieves, and the Dowager took a fierce old woman's pleasure in ordering Cordelia's wedding clothes and brooking no refusal, so that for the first time in her adult life Cordelia Verrell had gowns that had never belonged to anyone else. And he watched her bloom. That was the word for it, the very word he had thrown at Lord Hartwell in the first hour. Some flowers are planted in the shade by careless hands. It does not follow they cannot bloom. She bloomed. The grey composure that had been armour became, day by day, merely calm. The wit that had been a blade for keeping the world at bay became, day by day, merely delight, and the private happiness he had glimpsed under the singing robin came out of hiding and lived, now, openly on her face. So that people who had known her all her lives said to one another that they had never thought Cordelia Verrell handsome, and yet, lately, there was really something quite striking about her, and could not account for it, because they did not understand that they were watching a woman discover she was loved. Only one shadow fell across those weeks, and Adrian, in his happiness, misread it. Rosamond had changed. Where before she had been cold and cornered and openly at war, now she was contrite. She sought Cordelia out, tearful, and begged her sister's pardon for the letter to the Dowager, for the campaign, for the cruelty by the window at Hartwell Court so many weeks ago. She had been frightened, she said, and jealous and wicked, and she saw now how wrong she had been, and she wished only to make amends, and might she not, please, help with the wedding, help dress her sister for the great ball, be a true sister for once in her life. And Cordelia, who was just, and who loved her sister, and who was besides so full of her own new happiness that it overflowed toward everyone, forgave her. Of course she forgave her. She wept and embraced her, and let Rosamund into the preparations, glad past speaking to have the one thing her joy had lacked, a sister's blessing. Adrian watched this reconciliation with a faint unease he could not name, and so dismissed. He did not trust Rosamund. He would never trust Rosamund. But Cordelia's happiness at the reconciling was so plain that he had not the heart to poison it with suspicion, and he told himself that even a woman like Rosamund might be softened by a wedding, and that people did, sometimes, become better than they were. He was wrong. He knew, afterward, that he had known better, and had let love make him careless, and he never entirely forgave himself for it, for Rosamund's contrition was the whole of her scheme. She had understood that she could not attack Cordelia from without. The Duke's love, the Dowager's championship, the wall of steadiness stood too high, so she would do it from within. She would be admitted as a trusted sister into the very heart of the wedding, into Cordelia's confidence, into her dressing room on the night of the ball, and from that place, no one guarding against her, she would strike. The night of the winter ball at Hartwell Court came bitter and clear, the great house blazing with 1,000 candles, every window a square of gold thrown out upon the frozen park, carriages arriving in a long jewelled line up the drive. The whole county came, and more than the county. Word had spread as far as town of the extraordinary thing to be witnessed, and curiosity had drawn people 40 miles to see it. The Duke of Eastmere present his portionless bride, in the very ballroom where her sister had held her up to laughter, before the assembled elite of half the country. Cordelia was to dress at Hartwell Court itself, in a chamber Lord Hartwell had put at her disposal, for the Dowager had insisted she should not arrive dusty and cold from the Thornleigh roads, but should be prepared in comfort and come down in state. And Rosamund, helpful, tearful, reconciled Rosamund, was to dress her. Adrian arrived at 9. He had dressed with more care than he had taken in years, and he stood at the foot of Lord Hartwell's great staircase in his finest. The Eastmere ring on his hand and his aunt's diamonds glittering on his aunt beside him, and he waited for Cordelia to come down, and his heart, that managed and long quiet heart, beat like a boy's. She did not come down. An hour passed. The ballroom filled. The music began, the county gathered and glittered and, gradually, began to buzz, for it had come to see a duke present his bride, and the bride did not appear, and a whisper began to move through the golden rooms like a draught. Where is she? Where is the Vale girl? Has she taken fright? Has she cried off? Has the Duke thought better of it? And Rosamund Verrill moved beautiful and radiant through the crowd, in white, more lovely than she had ever been in her life, and let the whisper build, and said to those who asked, with a face of pretty distress, that she did not know, that poor Cordelia had seemed so nervous, that she did hope nothing was amiss. Adrian found the Dowager at his elbow, her old face sharp with alarm. Something is wrong, she said flatly. That girl is never late and never a coward. Go and find her, Adrian. Go now. He was already moving. He took the great stair 2 at a time, careless of the eyes below, and came to the door of the chamber where Cordelia was to have dressed, and knocked, and there was no answer, and he opened it, and stopped on the threshold. The room was in disarray. A dressing table overturned, the beautiful gown his aunt had ordered, a gown of dove-grey silk shot with silver, the colour of the river at dawn, chosen, because Cordelia had said once, laughing, that she had worn grey her whole life, and had learned to love it and would not be married in any other colour. That gown lay flung across the floor, and it was ruined, slashed and stained past saving, wine-soaked dark across the silver silk like a wound. And Cordelia sat on the floor beside it, in her shift and her old grey wrapper, her dark hair half undone, her face white as the fallen candles, and she was not weeping. She was past weeping. She looked up at him with an expression he had never seen on her and hoped to God he would never see again. The expression of a person who has understood, completely and finally, the depth of another's cruelty, and has understood too that it cannot be undone in time, that the trap has already closed. She has done it, Cordelia said. Her voice was flat and strange. "Adrian, she has done it. The gown is ruined. She pretended to spill the wine. An accident, so clumsy, so sorry. And there is no other, and it is past 10, and Adrian, there is worse. There is far worse. Go down. Go down and hear what she is telling them. For I cannot stop it from up here, and I would rather you heard the whole of it before you look at me again, so that if you believe her, you may go, and I will not have to watch your face while you decide." "I will believe nothing," Adrian said, "until you tell me. What is she telling them?" And Cordelia told him. She had pieced it together from the frightened, weeping maid Rosamund had bribed and then dismissed, from the shape of the thing itself, from a lifetime's knowledge of her sister's mind. Rosamund had not merely ruined the gown to keep her from the ball. That was only the beginning. Rosamund had, over these 3 weeks of false reconciliation, gathered the materials for a far crueller stroke, had produced and shown in strict confidence to 3 of the county's most reliable gossips a packet of letters in what appeared to be Cordelia's own hand. Rosamund could copy her sister's clear accountant script. They had learned to write at the same table, letters that seemed to reveal Cordelia as exactly the cold, calculating fortune hunter the county had always wanted to believe her. Letters mocking the Duke's plainness of dress and his rustic notions, boasting of how easily she had entrapped him, counting his 40,000 a year with a greedy pen. Laughing at the fool who thought a walk on a river meant love when it meant only a poor woman's careful angling for a great estate. They were forgeries. Cordelia had never written a word of them, but they were in her hand or near enough, and the county already believed her a schemer. And Rosamund had shown them tearfully, as a heartbroken sister revealing, at last, the dreadful truth she had tried so long to hide, that her poor deluded Duke was being played for a fool, and that she could no longer, in conscience, stay silent and watch a good man ruined. By now half that ballroom has heard it, Cordelia said from the floor in her flat white voice. By now they are all quite certain I am what they always wished me to be. And I cannot even come down to face it because I have no gown, and if I came down in this wrapper it would only prove the madness of me. She has thought of everything, Adrian. She has beaten us. I told you once I would find out for myself whether you were false, and I never once thought to guard against her proving me false to you. And now at last one tear did fall, and she scrubbed it away furiously, as though it were a betrayal. Go down. Go and read the letters. They are very convincing. She is cleverer than either of us. I do not blame you if you believe them. Only go and let it be quick. Adrian Marsh stood on the threshold of that ruined room, and he felt the whole managed edifice of his careful life tremble on its foundation. For here it was the dark hour, the thing his caution had always feared, the moment when the county's disbelief and the family's scheming and the whole massed weight of a world that could not credit his choice all came down at once, and demanded of him the one thing that could not be reasoned or commanded or bought. Faith, not evidence. There was evidence enough against her, cunningly made. The plain, unprovable, staking everything faith of a man who must decide, with a ballroom full of certainty roaring beneath him and letters in her own hand before his eyes. Whether he knows the woman on the floor better than the world knows her, better than the ink knows her, better than her own beautiful sister has made her out to be. And in that trembling moment, Adrian looked at Cordelia Verrell, at the ruined river-grey gown, at the white flat face. At the fury with which she scrubbed away the single tear, at the terrible generosity of a woman who, disgraced and cornered and beaten, was telling him to go, to save himself, to believe the worst of her if he must, and had thought even now, even here, more of sparing him the awkwardness of his choice than of pleading for her own life. And he began, quietly, to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh, nor a mad one. It was the same rusty, startled, delighted laugh she had provoked from him on the river the first morning, when she had caught him in his lie about being lost, and she looked up at him in blank astonishment, and he crossed the room, and he knelt down on the floor of that wrecked chamber in his finest clothes, in the wine and the ruin, and he took her white face in both his hands. "Cordelia Verrell," he said, "you are, without any exception, the most honest human being I have ever known, and you have just, in the worst hour of your life, tried to give me an honorable way to abandon you. Do you truly imagine, that I have spent all these weeks learning the whole of you, and could now be made to unknow it by a packet of letters your sister copied out of spite. I do not care if they are in your hand. I do not care if she has forged your soul itself. I know you. I have watched you turn pages for a friendless woman and fetch fees for a stranger's childbirth, and forgive the sister who is at this moment destroying you. The Cordelia in those letters does not exist. She never did, and I am not going down that staircase to read them and decide. I am going down that staircase to tell every soul in that room that they are forged, and that the woman who forged them is a liar, and that I am marrying you if I have to carry you down in that wrapper and be married in the ballroom this very night. He drew a breath. But I would rather you came down in silver. So, give me 1 hour. Can you trust me for 1 hour, Cordelia? You have asked me all these weeks to be believed. Now I am asking you. Believe me for 1 hour. She stared at him, the tears running now unchecked and unscrubbed, and she said in a whisper, "What are you going to do?" And the Duke of Eastmere rose from the floor, and there was on his face an expression his aunt would have recognized, and his enemies would have feared, and Cordelia had never yet seen, the cold, clean, particular resolve of a man who has finished being patient. "I am going to send for my aunt," he said, "and a needle, and every candle in this house. And you, Cordelia, are going to be married in grey after all, but not this grey, not a ruined one. Trust me 1 hour. Then come down when I send for you, however you are dressed, and let me do the rest." He bent and kissed her forehead once gently in the wreck of the room. "You have carried everyone your whole life. Let me carry this." The Dowager Countess of Marchburn, summoned from the ballroom by a footman with an urgent word, took one look at the ruined chamber and the wine-dark gown and her nephew's face, and did not waste a single breath on lamentation. "Letters, you say," she said, when Adrian had told her, swift and low. "Forged," in the child's hand, and the whole room drinking it down like ratafia. Her old eyes glittered, and Adrian saw, with a fierce inward gladness, that the Dowager Countess of Marchburn had not enjoyed herself so much in 20 years. "Very well. Then we shall need a needle, and my woman, who has dressed duchesses through worse disasters than this. And we shall need the truth of those letters, which is the one thing that spiteful child cannot have thought to guard against. Because she is clever, but she is not wise. And she has never in her life kept an honest account of anything." She rounded on Cordelia, who still sat white and stunned upon the floor. "Get up, my dear. Get up. You are about to be a duchess, and duchesses do not receive their aunts sitting in the wine. Up. There is work to do, and you, I think, are the only person in this house who can do the most important part of it. Tell me, these letters. They count his fortune, you say, 40,000 a year, and the rents and the estates." "So she said," the maid told her, Cordelia whispered, rising unsteadily. And the dowager smiled, a slow, terrible, delighted smile. "Then she has hanged herself with her own rope," she said. "For you keep books, child. Everyone in this county knows you keep books. It is half of why they despise you. And the sums in those letters, the greedy little sums your sister invented to make you look grasping, they will be wrong. She does not know his true rents. She does not know his true income. No one does but his man of business, and I dare say, now you, for I have watched my nephew talk to you of everything under heaven. A woman truly counting his fortune with a greedy pen would have it right. A woman forging such letters out of spite would guess, and guess wrong. Do you see? The very cleverness of the forgery is its ruin. An honest ledger will unmake it in a moment, and there is no one in 3 counties whose word on a column of figures will be believed over yours, for it is the one thing they have never been able to take from you." She struck the floor with her cane. "Now, my woman, the needle. And someone bring me the estate steward's book from my nephew's carriage, for I never travel without it, and we are going to show that ballroom exactly what honest account looks like, set beside a liar's." What followed, in that upstairs chamber, took the better part of the hour Adrian had asked for, the dowager's woman working a small miracle with the plain grey silk of Cordelia's own second-best gown, taking it in here and letting it fall there and pinning to its bodice, with the boldness of genius, the dowager's own river of diamonds, so that the humble dress became, in candlelight, something graver and finer and more striking than any confection of silver could have been. A woman in grey, crowned in a duchess's diamonds, exactly what she was and exactly what she was about to become. and while the woman sewed, Cordelia sat at a borrowed writing table, steady now, her hands no longer shaking, and set down in her clear black accountant's hand the true figures of the Eastmere estates as Adrian gave them to her, the real rents, the real income, every column square and honest. Beside a copy of the greedy false sums from the forged letters, which one of the gossips, shamed by the dowager's flat command, had surrendered up. And the two accounts, laid side by side, told the whole story at a glance to anyone who could add. The forged letters were wrong, absurdly, ignorantly wrong, the guesses of a woman who had never seen a true ledger in her life. No fortune hunter clever enough to entrap a duke would have miscounted his fortune by half. The lie undid itself in ink. Below, the ballroom had reached a fever. The whispers had become open talk. The letters, or the report of them, had passed from mouth to mouth until the whole glittering company believed it knew a delicious and shameful truth, that the plain sister was a schemer after all, exposed at last by the beautiful one, and that the poor besotted duke was even now upstairs, no doubt, having the scales struck from his eyes. Rosamond Verrall moved through it all luminous with triumph. She was careful to dress as sorrow, and she thought, she truly thought, for she was clever but not wise, that she had won. And then the great doors at the head of the ballroom stairs opened, and the Duke of Eastmere came in. He came alone, and he did not go to Rosamond, and he did not go to his host, and he did not go to explain himself to anyone. He walked to the centre of the floor, into the very middle of the assembled county, and he stood there, tall and unhurried and terrible in his stillness, and he waited, and the music faltered and stopped, and the talk died away in ripples outward from where he stood, until the whole vast candle-lit room was silent and every eye in it was upon him. "I understand," said the Duke of Eastmere, into that silence, in a voice that did not need to be raised, because no one in the world would have dared talk over it, "that letters have been shown about this room tonight. Letters said to be written by Miss Cordelia Verrall. Letters said to prove her a schemer, a mercenary, a woman who has counted my fortune with a greedy pen and laughed at me for a fool." He let it hang. "I have come down to speak of those letters. And then I have come to do a thing, before all of you, that I mean no soul in this room ever to forget." He drew from his breast the two accounts, Cordelia's true one and the forger's false one, and he held them up. "Here," he said, "is what the letters claim my income to be. And here is what it is, set down not by me, but upstairs in her own hand by the woman those letters slander, who has kept honest books since she was 19 and could no more make a false column than she could tell a lie to my face, which she has never once done, though the lie would have served her 100 times. He turned to the man nearest him, Lord Hartwell's own steward, a hard-headed fellow who kept the greatest accounts in the county, and he said, "Sir, you know figures. You know my estates by repute. Read these two, and tell this room which is the work of a fortune hunter who has studied my wealth, and which is the work of someone who has never seen it, and guessed wrong." The steward took the papers. He read them in a silence you could have heard a candle gutter in. And then he looked up, and his hard face was troubled, and he said slowly, so that the whole room heard him, "Your Grace, the letters are wrong, wildly wrong. No one who truly knew your income wrote these figures. This," he held up the false sheet, "this is a guess, a poor one. Whoever wrote these letters had never seen a true account of your estate in their life." He looked at the other sheet, at Cordelia's clean columns, and something like respect crossed his weathered face. "This other hand, now, this is the hand of someone who keeps books for a living, and keeps them square. These two were never written by the same person, Your Grace. I would stake my place on it." A sound went through the ballroom then, a long, low, indrawn sound, the sound of 100 people understanding at once that they'd been made fools of, and turning, as one, to look at the beautiful woman in white who had shown them the letters. Rosamond Verrall had gone the colour of ash. "You copied her hand," Adrian said to her, not loudly, into the terrible silence, and every soul in the room heard it. "You learned to write at the same table, and you copied her hand, and you invented the greedy sums, and you did not know enough of what you slandered to make them true, because you have spent your whole life believing that a woman's worth is a number you can guess by looking at her face. You guess wrong. You have always guessed wrong, and tonight you have proved it in ink, before the whole county, not against your sister, but against yourself. He turned from her then, wholly, as one turns from something finished, and he looked toward the head of the ballroom stairs, and he raised his hand. And the great doors opened again, and Cordelia Verrell came down. She came in grey, her own plain grey, taken in and pinned and crowned with the dowager's diamonds, so that it caught every one of Lord Hartwell's 1,000 candles and threw the light back like the river at dawn. And she came slowly, her chin up, her dark eyes fixed on one face only in all that vast and staring room. And she was not the plain sister any more, and she was not the schemer, and she was not the woman no one would ever choose. She was a woman coming down a staircase toward the man who had chosen her, in the sight of everyone who had ever laughed. And there was on her grave face the private happiness that had once hidden under a singing robin, out now unhidden, blazing, for all the world to see and none of the world to touch. And the Duke of Eastmere crossed the ballroom for her. He crossed the whole vast floor, the entire glittering length of it, past the assembled elite of half the county, past the diamonds and the earl's daughters and the mothers who had thrown their daughters at him for 11 years, past his ashen aunt by blood, the whispering Rosamond, past every face that had been so certain no such thing could happen, and every eye followed him, and no one breathed, and he did not once look to the left or the right. He crossed the whole floor to the foot of the stairs, to the woman in grey, and he stopped before her. And in the ringing silence of that enormous room he went down, the Duke of Eastmere, 9th of his line, the most sought-after man in 3 counties. He went down on one knee, on Lord Hartwell's polished floor, before them all. Cordelia Verrell, he said, and his voice, though he did not raise it, filled the whole silent room. I have been sought my whole life and chosen by no one, and you are the only person who ever looked past what I have to what I am. I told you once I would rather walk one grey morning beside you than dance a lifetime of ballrooms with any other woman alive. I meant it on a hidden path where no one could hear. I mean it now, here, before every soul who ever doubted you, so that none of them may ever again pretend not to have heard. Marry me. Not to lift you, you were never below me. If anything, it is the reverse, and this whole room knows it now. Marry me because I love you, and because you saw me, and because in all the world you are the one thing I was never offered, and the only thing I ever wanted. Choose me, Cordelia, as I have chosen you before them all. And Cordelia Verrell, standing crowned in diamonds at the foot of the staircase in the very room where her own sister had once laughed that no one would ever choose her, looked down at the greatest man in 3 counties kneeling on the floor for her love, and she did not weep, and she did not falter, and she said, in a low, clear voice that carried to every corner of that vast and silent room, because it did not try to, I choose you, Adrian. I chose you on the river, before I knew a single thing you had, when you were only a foolish man who had lost his way on a path that could not be lost. I would have chosen you if you had been the plainest gentleman in England. That you are a duke is the least of you, and always was. Her voice broke, just once, and yes, before them all. Yes, he rose, and he drew her ungloved, work-roughened, account-keeping hand to his lips, and then, because it was no longer too soon, and no longer too public, and because he had waited a whole managed lifetime for exactly this and would wait no longer, he raised his head and gently, before the entire assembled county, he kissed her. The ballroom broke into a roar of applause, of astonishment, of 100 people who had come to see a plain woman humbled and found instead that they had witnessed something none of them would forget. A great man choose freely and publicly and without shame. The one woman they had all agreed was beneath his notice, and by choosing her, show them all that they had never once in their lives understood what worth was. Old Mr. Pettibone the vicar was weeping openly and not ashamed of it. Sir Henry Verrell had to be given a chair, and the Dowager Countess of Marchbann stood at the edge of the floor with her diamonds, her nephew's bride, and her old face wet and fierce and shining, and she struck the floor once with her ebony cane hard and dead, with one sweeping, glittering, ancient glare around that entire room. Dared any single soul in it to smirk? Not one dared, and Rosamond stood alone in her white gown in the middle of all that joy, ash-pale, forgotten, the beautiful woman no one was looking at, undone not by anyone's cruelty, but by the plain arithmetic of her own lie, and she understood. At last, and far too late, the thing her sister had understood weeks before in a cold parlor, that she had spent her whole life believing a face was a fortune and had never once been told that she was worth being kind to, and so had never learned how to be it, and had gambled everything on the certainty that no one would ever choose the plain sister over the beautiful one, and had lost, because she had been wrong about the only thing that had ever mattered, and was wrong about it still. The wedding of the Duke of Eastmere to Miss Cordelia Verrell took place at the little church at Netherford 6 weeks later, old Mr. Pettibone officiating with hands that shook so with joy he twice lost his place, and the Dowager Countess of Marchburn in the front pew in every diamond she owned, glaring magnificently at a congregation that would not have dreamed of smirking. Cordelia was married at her own insistence and to the Duke's delight, in grey, a new grey this time, dove grey silk shot with silver, the colour of the river at dawn, the gown remade at last as it should have been. She kept all her life the ruined one folded away in silver paper, for she said it had taught her the exact worth of the man who had knelt in its wine. They did not live unhappily, and it is worth the telling how. Sir Henry Verrell lived out his days in comfort at Thornley, which the Duke quietly disencumbered of its mortgages within the month, never letting the old man feel the charity of it, so that Sir Henry believed to his dying day that his own affairs had simply, mysteriously, come right, and Cordelia, who kept the books, let him believe it. For she had learned from a master the kindness of a debt forgiven without a word. As for Rosamond, she was not cast out, though the whole county expected it, and would have relished it. It was Cordelia who would not have it. "She is my sister," she said to Adrian, "and she is frightened, and she has just learned in the hardest way in the world the thing I could not teach her gently. Let us not teach it to her twice." And so, in time, when the scandal had cooled and the beauty had wept out the worst of her ruin, the new Duchess of Eastmere did for Rosamond the one thing that could truly undo her. She was kind to her. Steadily, unaccountably, undeservedly kind, asking nothing, expecting nothing, until Rosamond, who had never once in her life been shown what worth looked like when it had nothing to gain, began slowly, painfully, far too late but not too late entirely, to learn it. She married, eventually. Not gloriously, but well enough, a decent widowed clergyman with kind eyes and a small living, who loved her plainly and asked nothing of her face, and she was, by all accounts, a better wife than anyone had expected, and a far better woman, and she never in her life forgot who had made her one. But it is the Duke and his Duchess we must end with, for it was their story from the first. Adrian Marsh lived out a long life, and it was not a solitary one, and he was never bored in it again. They walked the river most mornings, all their years, at the middle of the path, whatever the weather, for he said, and meant it, that a man who has found the one person who will walk beside him is a fool to walk anywhere else. She kept his books because she loved to, and kept them square, and there was never a shrewder mistress of a great estate in 3 counties, nor a more beloved one, for the tenants and the poor and the friendless of the whole county came to know the Duchess of Eastmere as the one great lady who truly saw them, having spent so long herself unseen. And on the far side of a long life, when they were both grey, she in truth now, and he silvered at the temple, the old Duke was heard to say, to a young man who asked him how he had ever come to choose so strangely, so far beneath what the world thought his due. "Beneath me?" the Duke of Eastmere said, and he looked across the room to where his Duchess sat with her ledgers by the fire, the lamplight on her grave and lovely face, and the private happiness of 40 years choosing plain upon it. "You have it exactly backward, and so did the whole county, and so did I once for about half an hour. I did not stoop to choose her, I reached up. Every man in that ballroom had been offered the finest thing in the kingdom for 11 years, and none of us had the wit to see it, because it wore grey and kept its own accounts and never once asked to be admired. I crossed a ballroom for her, boy, before them all. It is the single wisest thing I have done in a long life of being thought clever, and if you are ever fortunate enough to find the one soul in all the world who sees you, the real you, the one behind whatever the world has hung about your neck, then I will give you the only counsel worth having." He smiled, and it was the rusty, startled, delighted smile a woman in grey had first surprised out of him on a cold river, a lifetime ago. "Cross the room. Cross the whole room, and do not once look to the left or the right, and choose them before them all. Let the whole world laugh. It will stop laughing. and you will have the one thing the whole world cannot give you and never could, which is to be chosen, wholly and truly and out loud, for no reason on this earth but yourself." And across the room the Duchess of Eastmere looked up from her books and met her husband's eyes. And though she had heard him tell it 100 times, she smiled at him still, the way she had smiled coming down a staircase in borrowed diamonds, the way she had smiled under a singing robin, the way she smiled at him every morning of a long and cherished life on the river path, at the middle, where two people who had each been overlooked by the whole world had found, against all its certainty, each other. No one had ever thought she would be chosen. She had been chosen most of all.